Welcome, sports fans, to another episode of the Detroit Lions Tomorrow. In this show, I will talk about the Thanksgiving Day game and recap it in detail. I will preview the game tomorrow that the Lions have with the Chicago Bears at Soldier Field. I will share the injury reports with you, and I'll have a prediction at the end. In this segment, I'm going to talk about the Thanksgiving Day game that was played between the Lions and the Houston Texans. This is the first time the Lions have played an AFC opponent since they played the Texans in 2012. And if you go to the previous episode I had on that, I talk a little bit about that game that was played then. But just a little recap on what happened in Thanksgiving. It started out pretty well for the Lions. They scored a touchdown in their opening possession and then got the ball back after a 3-and-out by the Texans, I believe it was. They were backed up in their own end a bit, and I believe they had a holding penalty that backed them up even farther. But then Matt Stafford threw a pass that was tipped by J.J. Watt, and he eventually brought it down and scrambled into the end zone for a touchdown. And from that moment onward, even though the Texans missed the extra point and the Lions still had the lead, that's where I felt like the game was starting to turn a little bit. On the next possession, the Lions fumbled the ball and the Texans recovered. The possession after that, they fumbled the ball again, and the Texans fumbled it back, which resulted in the Lions actually scoring a touchdown after the Texans had taken the lead at 13-7. The Lions regained the lead 14-13. However, it was a bit precarious because they'd had three straight possessions where they had a turnover to the point where it was Darrell Bevell that said essentially to him, enough's enough. And I thought it was strange that Matt Patricia didn't step up. But in light of the development of things, I think we can see why things started to turn out the way they did after the game. As I was saying, though, after the touchdown where the Lions regained the lead, the Lions were trailing at halftime because the Texans started moving the ball on them. To open the third quarter, though, the Lions got the ball, and while they possessed the ball through mainly running plays for more than half the quarter, they eventually had to kick a field goal, which cut the lead, I believe it was, to 23-17. Then after that, in their next possession, Matt Stafford nearly threw his second interception. And then after that, the Texans started really having some fun at the Lions' expense, I would say. Will Fuller started getting wide open, and they'd already had a touchdown pass to Duke Johnson in the second quarter, where he was wide open. And Will Fuller ended up beating the Lions not just once, but twice for touchdowns on the left-hand side, much like the Colts, if you recall, exploited the Lions on the right-hand side of the field. Or if you will, their right-hand side, the Lions' left and right, respectively. And then that padded the Texans' lead. The Lions tried to run a trick play that Matt Stafford almost caught, and I believe that was from Kerryon Johnson. However, he just barely dropped it. So the Lions ended up having to settle for, I was going to say they ended up having to settle for a field goal, but I don't, they ended up having to settle for, I think they didn't score on that play, if I recall correctly. That's what it was. And then after the game was out of hand, Matt Stafford tied Tony Romo for the most touchdown passes on Thanksgiving. Lions got the 2-point conversion, but by that time the Texans were already way ahead on Will Fuller's wide open touchdown passes, and they ended up losing the game 41-25. It was really disappointing to me to see Duke Johnson and Will Fuller that wide open twice. I know the Lions don't have the secondary, and we know they don't have the pass defense, but for somebody to be that wide open and 3 straight times to the same side of the field. And mind you, this is Desmond Trufant's side of the field, and he wasn't in there by that time because he had come out of the game due to injury and has since been placed on injured reserve. I was really horrified by that, and I guess I wasn't the only one, because within 48 hours of the game being over, that's when Sheila Ford decided to fire both Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, and that's why I had said I wasn't really that surprised by that. It was an extremely disappointing effort. I was extremely disappointed that the Lions only had 107 yards rushing, I believe it was, to a team that was giving up 160. And I had stated that was one of my keys to that game for the Lions to win. And they just didn't do it. And Deshaun Watson executed beautifully, threw for 318 yards in the game, I think it was. And while the Lions stopped the Texans from running the football, it still was not anywhere close to the effort I would have expected. And due to that effort, the Lions lost their 4th straight Thanksgiving Day game. And it cost their coach and GM their jobs, which they may very well have lost eventually anyway, but did not have to be that soon. In the next segment, I will go over the stats for the Lions and the Bears for tomorrow's game. Stay tuned to the Detroit Lions tomorrow on Ed's Sports Channel.